Okay, at this time, the question is how to know every possibilities and how to know what is the best for our project.
So what do you mean by all possibilities
Uh,
of what?
so we can make it in a file, we can make it in core data, we can make it in Realm. It's a lot of solution today, but how to choose the best for us?
You depend on the case. For example, you want to cache the customer list, so it works offline.
Yeah.
And it's just a list of items. You can use URL cache.
Okay.
URL cache, it gives you some caching by default. As long as your server is returning the right cache control headers in the request, you get this for free. URL cache will do that for you, right?
Okay. Okay.
Now, how can you know about URL cache? You need to learn about the whole ecosystem of iOS, right? Because this is part of the iOS platform,
Yeah.
right? The macOS platform. And how you learn this? For example, if you're using URL session, you read the documentation of URL session, right?
Yeah.
You will learn all the components you can have there. They have good documentation nowadays about all those frameworks. But let's say the problem with URL cache is that you don't control for how long the cache lives, because the system does all that for you. You have very limited control. If you want to have more control of the implementation, then you can save something to the file system, because you have space in the file system and you manage for how long the cache will be there. So you could use the file manager, for example. When you want to persist something, it's just like I want to
Okay.
persist this data somehow in the file system. But if you want to say, I want to have a query mechanism, I want to store a lot of customers and I want to be able to find a customer by name. If it's stored in the file system, how can you find a specific customer with a name? You need to load all the customers in
Customer.
memory and do the search in memory.
Yeah.
Now, this can, if you have 1 million customers, you need to bring 1 million customers in memory and make a search in a million customers. And this can blow up the memory. So if you need this kind of querying mechanisms with more too many customers, too many rows, then you can start thinking of another framework like Core Data or Realm that implement indexing, schemas, queries,
Yeah, an object graph.
more database like. If you need SQLite as well. But it all will depend on the requirements, on what kind of, how much data are you storing, what are you going to do with that data, for how long you need it to be stored. Does it need to be encrypted? You cannot encrypt with core data, but you can encrypt with Realm or SQLite.
Yeah.
You can also encrypt it, right? So, and what kind of level of encryption? You can encrypt things with core data, but what kind of level of encryption? What kind of guarantees do you need? And this will, do you need validation? Core data provides you mechanism for validations as well. So
Okay.
simpler
Okay.
to
Understand.
more complex.
Yeah,
You
there
can
are
also
We
have an
always
in-memory
start.
cache. Yeah.
Sorry. We always start by the easiest way.
I like to start simple, and I recommend starting simple.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Again, if you have requirements though, like for example, you need encryption, like instantly you can just discard some of the choices. Of course, like an in-memory would be the simplest solution for a store. But if it doesn't work for your case, then I don't see the point of starting there just because it's the simplest thing, right? So it needs to make sense for what you want to implement.
For
Okay.
example, in in-memory implementation, you load something from the backend, and you can keep it in a property, and you can reuse it, right? But if you kill the app and open again, it's gone. If you need that extra persistence, then you can look at URL cache with the disk persistence space. It can do that for you. But then if you want to manage the lifetime of that cache, you can use File Manager. If you want to be able to query and perform more like validation like or encryption, you can also encrypt with File Manager, because you can just encrypt the data and store to the file system. But if you want query mechanisms, you will start looking more as a database.
Okay.
Right, so it will always depend on the case at hand.
Okay. With schemes, it's better, I think, yes.
Start simple.
Yeah.
So this way you can release, the first versions of your application much sooner.
Yeah.
Because you don't need to make this decision upfront. You can start with an in-memory implementation. That's the simplest thing to do. And you show to your customers. They're like, you know what? Let's release it to the App Store. It's done.
Okay.
Instead of working for, I don't know, a month trying to set up the core data correctly and putting everything together, maybe you do it in 1 week. In a couple of days, you have a prototype working. And if it's good enough, you release with in-memory persistence. And in the next version, you implement a caching new feature added. Now your app works even when offline. Boom, fantastic. Next one.
Okay.
Now you have a search in the application. Boom, let's move it to core data and so on.
Yeah, and that's the idea also, like if you separate properly your system, you can start, for example, with the file manager. You can literally write data on disk, which is very, very easy to do. You don't need the schema, you don't need migration, stuff like that, right?
Right.
You ship, then you need something else. It's easy now to swap the file manager implementation for a core data implementation. That's the whole point here, right? So it allows you to go fast all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Understand.
Yeah.
And that's why I prefer to start from the application needs, the requirements, and you can develop the UI. You can develop things without actually having the infrastructure ready. So even if there's no backend yet, you can still simulate a backend with some in-memory implementation. So you can move much faster and defer decisions about frameworks later. Because if you make the decisions of the framework first, it's more likely that you make decisions about your implementation of the UI, of the domain layer, based on the frameworks. And then you'll be locked with the framework.
Yeah.
And that may not be great. So keep it simple and only bring infrastructure complexity when needed later on.
It's the same for new design pattern, like decorators or something like that. It's the same way?
Yes, only bring them when needed. Don't start from patterns.
Yeah.
You use the patterns when you're going to achieve a specific goal.
Yes.
So at least for me, when I start learning patterns, I like them so much, I just want to use them everywhere. But we need to hold back and say, no. Let's make sure we are using them when actually needed.
Okay.
So start simple. But simple doesn't mean easy, right? You need to know how to design your application in a way that is decoupled from those frameworks. So there are specific techniques. You need to learn the architectural patterns or build that architectural knowledge to decouple your app from infrastructure.